Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you're doing good. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to carry on with American Civilization, the fifth part, and we will have one more video to conclude with this chapter, and we are going to stop in the Declaration of Independence. And maybe I can add the War of Independence. How did it go? But I'm going to end this chapter in the sixth video, but I'm going to carry on later with other chapters such as the pre-Civil War, the Civil War, the Reconstruction, the Progressive Era, or even, if I have time, the Gilded Age. So, a quick review about what we have dealt with the last videos. We have spoken about the colonists in general, 13 colonies, how did they get to America, why did they go there, the reasons, religious and economic reasons mostly. And we have spoken about the pilgrims, how did they go to Holland, the boat, and it was drifted in the ocean, a tempest and everything. So we have spoken also about the life in the 13 colonies, which was quite important, and how things started to develop to representatives, the governors, and the system of governing in America. Today I'm going to carry on with the War of Independence, a quite good and an important chapter that we need to know about. So I shall start with the origins. So independence was declared on July the 4th, 1776. So this, when we say Declaration of Independence, it was not independence. It was only the declaration. It means the Americans, or those colonists, because they were not Americans yet. So those colonists, decided to declare that they are no longer linked with England. It means they declared that they are independent as free states and not colonies of England in America. This is what we mean by Declaration of Independence. So, an important man named John Adams, we are going to see him later on, he declared, or he even described, and I quote, "The history of American Revolution began as far back as 1620." The end of the quote. So, according to John Adams, of course, the belief, the will of independence, the colonists wanted the independence since 1620, and the Declaration of Independence was in 1776, almost a century to declare that they want to be independent. So, what are the factors that helped or that played a major role to engender such kind of feeling and will in the hearts and the minds of the colonists, such a great will in independence? The first factor is self-governance and self-reliance. These two factors were mainly found in the North. In Plymouth, Massachusetts, they did things which they couldn't do in England. They relied on themselves, although the hard living conditions, and they governed themselves. They did not need the consent of the king in order to govern their community. They made their own constitution, let's say between brackets, of course, a small constitution named the Mayflower Compact, made by the Pilgrims, and in which they have written some specific rules which were respected as well in order to protect each individual of their community. That is what happened in Massachusetts, and this is one of the major factors that played a role in giving such a feeling in the heart of the colonists. Sorry. Then the second thing is the cultural attainment. We had diversity in New England, in America, the 13 colonies. Many people came from all over the world to the New World, and they lived together, although there are differences, either in terms of religion, customs, traditions, or whatsoever. Cultural attainment. Then we have the Renaissance ideas and humanism, which we all know about. So, meanwhile, there was what we call the English and the French clash. So, the French, they took territories westwards, in the west of the 13 colonies, because the 13 colonies were established on the east coast, and on the west coast there was the French who took territories there. And this was a bit of a problem for the colonists who wanted to expand westwards. Whenever they encountered the French, they didn't let them pass. So this was a bit of a problem to the colonists, and the French here did not only challenge the 13 colonies, they challenged the British Empire as well, because do not forget, here the 13 colonies were not independent. So if something bad happens to them, it means England as well is included. And of course, France and England were not a allied nations. So there was a war between the French and the English. But meanwhile, in the 13 colonies, there was what we call the Abbey Congress. What is the Abbey Congress? Of course, it is a try to make the 13 colonies united under one president whose name is Thomas Jefferson, who would represent the king rather than representing the 13 colonies. And of course, the colonists refused. Then later on, the Anglo-French Wars finished, and the English were victorious. So England here in 13 colonies won the war against the French. The war was between England and some Indians versus French and some Indians. It was a bloody war, but the English came out victorious. So, the English now, after they have defeated the French, they wanted, they had more lands to control. And instead of giving them to the colonists, they wanted to give these lands to the Indians. Why? For two reasons. The first one was to prevent any war against the Indians, and also it was like a bit as a reward, because some Indians fought with the English people. And the colonists, of course, did not like that decision. They resisted because they wanted to explore and expand westwards. So here we have another point to discuss, which is new financial policies. What do you mean by that? You know, when there is a war, the government has to finance the soldiers, the weapons, etc. So he has to finance the war in general. So England spent a lot of money. England wanted to get back that money, so England imposed some taxes on the Americans, or the 13 colonies. And these taxes were called the Intolerable Acts. Do not confuse between Intolerable Acts and the Coercive Acts. Coercive Acts, we are going to see about them later on. So, the new financial policies, the last point to discuss today. We had some specific taxes, such as the Sugar Act in 1764, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Act, and the Tea Tax Act. Okay, so these are all taxes related to sugar. Stamp Act is related to the printing things that we need to print, to write, paper, etc. And the Townshend Act, it was in Boston. And the Tea Tax Act from the East India Company to sell the British tea to the Americans. And there are some things that happened according to these acts. So the Townshend Act in Boston, more precisely, it was a snowy day, and the Bostonians, or those who lived in Boston, they were out playing with snow, and they were hitting the Royal Army, the Royal Soldiers, means the soldiers of England who were in America, in Boston more precisely. They were throwing at them snow, and one of them ordered the men to shoot them. So they killed citizens. So it was called the Boston Massacre. Then here the American, the we can say Americans now, because people got upset. You know, there was blood. Blood was spilled. So things started to change. And King George, in order to George III, of course, in order to calm things, he annulled all the taxes except the Tea Tax Act. He told the colonists, if you want me to take the Tea Tax Act, this means that you are independent. It means that you are not related to England. So he left the Tea Tax Act. And the three others, Sugar, Stamp, and Townshend Act, were repealed or annulled. This is it for today. It is the first part of the War of Independence. In the next video, I'm going to finish it. I'm going to carry on with the coercive acts and how did it start, then the War of Independence, and the end of the war, and we have a new thing called the United States of America, and I'm going to give that in details. So as always, if it is helpful, that's more like it. If you have more questions, feel free to message me. I'm going to leave my personal email as always. And also thank you for 500 subscribers. It's great to see that this channel is a bit useful to the others. Feel free to share the channel with your friends, with your students. And I'm going to tell you, see you next time. Peace.